My husband and I moved into this small upstairs 2-bedroom apartment shortly after we were married. It was a beautiful old Victorian house, and the owner, a widow, lived downstairs in the rest of the house. We only lived there for about 1 to 2 months. A few weeks after we had moved in, I woke one night and was completely petrified. I was absolutely terrified. My heart was in my throat, pounding like it would jump out of my chest. Of what? I don't know. I can only describe it as an overwhelming feeling of evil. I saw nothing. I woke my husband up and told him we had to leave the house right now. He looked at me like I was crazy, of course. It was around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. He must have saw the urgency and seriousness on my face, because I wouldn't even talk about what I was feeling. I just held on to him and insisted that we leave and drive somewhere, anywhere, before I said a thing, which we did. I then explained to him what had happened. He believed my feelings were sincere, but I had no details, just an overwhelming feeling of evil. Well, we moved out shortly after that, but I wasn't crazy. Almost 3 to 4 years later, still living in the same town, a girl came to work at the company that I worked for. She was the daughter of the widow who had lived downstairs of that creepy apartment. Oh, what a small world. We chatted along nicely. Then I told her what had happened that night, and wasn't it insane? She looked at me. Her face went pale, and she swallowed hard. "What month did you say that happened?" she asked me. "June." "Why?" She then proceeded to tell me about her brother. Her brother had committed suicide many years earlier, in the bedroom that we slept in. It was over a girl. He had shot himself with a rifle, and it had been a June night. It still gives me the creeps when I think about it. Thanks for reading. I'm only writing now that I've moved into a new house. I've lived in 2 houses where I've had things happening. The first house I lived, things would disappear. As soon as you put it down, you would turn around and it wouldn't be there. I would be home late at night by myself, and the phone would keep ringing. When I went to answer it, no one would be there. After about a half an hour, I would usually unplug the phone. Well, one time when I did this, it still continued to ring all night long. Only once did I have the nerve to pick it up. Dead silence. The other house I have lived in, the most recent, I had a lot of things going on there. When I first moved in, I was doing some stuff around the house and decided to put some shelves into a closet that is in a bedroom in the basement. While I was hammering, I could hear someone or something knocking on the wall. This wouldn't have been so bad if I knew there could be someone on the other side, but being down in the basement, I knew it was on foundation, and after that, a lot of dirt. It just kept going knock, 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 always in threes. Needless to say, I ran out of there. When I went back down the next day, it had luckily stopped and never happened again. Most of the things that ever happened in the house were usually in that room, and I unfortunately was the only one who ever had any problems. I would go down into the room, which eventually became my bedroom. It would smell cigarette smoke, as though someone had just been in there, smoking. No one in my house smokes. I could have put it off as one of the kids sneaking one, except it happened a few times when I was home alone. I would get woken up in the middle of the night by someone shaking the bed, or picking up a corner of the bed and letting it drop. One night, it felt as though someone was under the mattress and sticking their finger up, pushing the bed up. The worst stuff, though, started happening when the landlord was considering moving back into the house. I would wake up and feel terrified. It is hard to describe just how scared I was, but I've never felt more scared in my entire life. I wouldn't be able to move, only my eyes, and I would never see anything around me. just the normal shapes that were around the room. The worst night though that happened was on the night we were supposed to have left. I woke up to a growling noise and what felt like an arm being pushed down across my neck. I've since found out that the landlord's wife had passed away in the house, though I don't know what the basement room had to do with it. That was added on after she had died. I'm lucky enough to have gotten moved out without any more things happening, and I'm praying that the new house is entity-free. Thanks for listening. I hesitate calling this a ghost story because I don't know what it was. It could have happened by normal means, but they would have been odd circumstances. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was walking down Harbor Boulevard in Costa Mesa, California. Harbor is long, and it's one of the streets that borders Disneyland. The section I was walking along was almost exclusively commercial. I passed a woman with a bruised face and a Universal Studios baseball cap with a logo in shiny silver letters, walking the other way. A few blocks later, I passed her again, going the other way. I think I may have smiled at her this time. A few blocks later, I passed her a third time, still walking the other way. I should point out that I was just walking. I never stopped to look into a store or restaurant. I was maintaining a steady pace. While I am no race walker, I have about an average walking speed. I'm not extraordinarily slow. After the third time I turned around, I don't want to exaggerate. I didn't whirl around by any means. I probably kept walking about another 10 steps, saying to myself, this is kind of weird, and maybe stop for a brief moment to think about this. When I turned around, she was gone. There was a Polo Loco restaurant right there. I was in there and saw no sign of her. I went and looked down the nearest cross street. Again, no sign of her. As I say, I don't claim this a ghost story. I just claim this a weird event that happened to me, which is possible to explain through natural causes, but would be an odd circumstance. Yes, she could have gotten a ride, or had driven, but in that case, why would I have passed her on the sidewalk each time? Wouldn't she have driven or gotten a ride exactly where she was going, rather than half a block farther? If you have any light you could shed upon this, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Over the past 50 years or so, many members of my family have had interesting ghostly experiences. None of them have been particularly frightening, though. Here are a couple of those experiences. And these take place in Vancouver, British Columbia area. About 15 years ago, my grandmother was chopping cabbage up for supper one evening and accidentally cut her finger with a knife. As she was running her finger under the cold water tap, she distinctly heard a voice saying, "I've told you to be careful with knives, Kitty." The voice was that of her Aunt Neil, who had died 40 years previously. She was always scolding my grandmother for something or the other. Another experience happened to my aunt. 20 years ago, she and her family moved into a gorgeous 4-bedroom house in a wonderful area. The house itself was about 2 years old. After a while, she would find things missing. She put a brand new packet of knitting needles on the kitchen shelf, and when she'd go to get them, they'd be gone. But anything else on the shelf was then on the floor. Her daughter was at school, and her infant son was way too young to climb up there. The knitting needles turned up in the bath of all places. It was this moment then, when she thought there was a spirit in the house. She was even more convinced when she heard singing up in her daughter's room. She went up there and found no one. That night, my cousin refused to sleep in her room. A little while after that, Auntie went upstairs to check on the baby. As she looked in the cot where Andy was fast asleep, she swore she saw a woman's hand gently stroking his cheek. She calmly told the ghost, "He's asleep. Please don't wake him up." The ghost left. The ghost also likes to crash my aunt's parties. If guests were over, she'd come downstairs and join in. The only people who knew she was there were my aunt and my grandmother. I had only one experience with a ghost. I was babysitting one evening and was watching TV in the family room. All of a sudden, the dog perked up and started wagging its tail. I knew it was her. I said, "Come in and sit down," and continued to watch the TV. There were several other things that happened, but fortunately, the spirit was friendly and harmless. When my aunt moved out, she found out that the property where her house stood was once owned by the native Indians of the area and sold to the government in the early 1980s. My aunt thought that her ghost had darkish skin. Funny thing is that my uncle never saw or heard the ghost at all. There are many more stories to tell, but they'll come later. About 2 weeks ago, we were in bed watching TV. It was around 9:30 to 10 when we heard footsteps, kinda like our kids had gotten out of bed. Well, I got up and checked the kids, but they were still in bed sleeping. I went back to bed. About 5 minutes later, it happened again. This time, it sounded like it was running downstairs. My husband grabbed his gun. I went in the kids' room, and they were still sleeping. Vince said everything was locked up, so no one was in our house. We couldn't explain what happened, so we went to sleep. 5:45 in the morning, my daughter, who was 7, came in mumbling to me until I told her to calm down. She said it felt like someone was at the end of her bed and pushed her mattress, and in doing so, she heard her springs go up, like someone was on the bed with her. She was looking for her cat, which was asleep in her room. Now, we've been in our house almost 4 years now. Our house is a brand new home of about 5 years old. I started thinking about something that has happened in our house that I mentioned to my husband. I told him, "Remember a couple of times we had been gone all day, and when we came home, I smelled a man's cologne, very strong in some places?" I also told him it wasn't his cologne. So here I was thinking that someone had been in our house. Yesterday, September 22nd, 1999, I was home by myself, watching TV downstairs. It was about 11:30 a.m., and I could have sworn my son, who is 6, was home in his room walking around, but he was at school. No one but myself was home. I went upstairs. Nothing was there. Today, September 23rd, 1999, I got home around 10:30 a.m., went upstairs, and there was a smell. I'm sorry I can't describe the smell, but all I can say is it doesn't smell good. Now, this smell took me off today, because we had the smell prior from today. The strange thing about it is, only happens once in a while, and it usually smells strong in the hallway, in my daughter's room upstairs. You would think a pungent smell like that would smell up the other rooms, but it never does. Every time I try to find where the smell comes from, there's never a pinpoint spot. Does anyone have any comments that they can help us with? How can we actually tell if we have some kind of paranormal activity going on in here? What we have experienced right now seems strange and definitely unnormal. Thank you. I actually have 2 stories, and I'm not sure I would call them ghost stories or not. Perhaps they are angels, but nonetheless, they happened and are not necessarily related. When I was in high school, I was madly in love with a guy 2 years older than me. I was a senior, and he was graduated and in the Air Force. He was my first love. Shortly before my high school graduation, I had made tentative plans to visit him at his base in Mississippi. I called him with my plan. he was less than thrilled. It was during this call that I found out he was seeing another girl, and we broke up. I was utterly devastated. I kept the pain to myself mostly. Nobody really knew how terribly it affected me. I was beside with myself with my heart. A couple of days after we broke up, I was in my bedroom upstairs. I heard my mother call my name from the bottom of the steps, and she sounded very strange. She said, "Come down here. You got some flowers delivered to you." I went to the kitchen, and my mother looked utterly baffled. I was convinced they were from Dan, and he wanted me back. The bouquet was huge and beautiful, with roses and exotic flowers and greens. It was obviously a very expensive arrangement. I opened the card and it said, "What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the master calls a butterfly." Signed Anonymous. I asked everyone I knew if they sent the flowers. Nobody owned up to it. Nobody. My mom tried to call the florist. The florist said that the only thing they knew is that it came in FTD, which meant that it wasn't local. To this day, more than 15 years later, I still don't know who sent those flowers, but I somehow like to believe that they were a gift from an angel. The second story happened this past year. Both of my parents died this past year, both unexpectedly and very young. My mom died of a burst aneurysm in her heart, and my father died of complications of a heart bypass surgery. She was 59, and my father was 62. After my mom died, strange things began to happen. The first thing was the night of the first funeral home visitation. I was at that time at home, writing a letter to my mother to be placed in her casket to be buried with her. My sister and father were at my parents' house getting dressed when my sister, who was ironing in the basement, heard an extremely loud crash come from upstairs in the kitchen. It made her jump. She said she had been thinking about Mom. My dad, at the time of the large crash, was standing in the bedroom trying to decide what suit to wear. He said that he was thinking, no, I shouldn't wear that suit. Yvonne, my mom, wouldn't like that. My dad and my sister went into the kitchen. Above the kitchen sink was a window that my mom had filled with crystals and stained glass pretties that were suction cupped to the window. My mom's favorite was of a blue stained glass oval of an angel praying. It was that glass ornament that had fallen into the sink and made the crash. Those ornaments had been there for years and never fell into the sink, but they did this day. 2 days later, I had to attend a doctor's appointment. My mother and dad were leaving to meet the funeral director, and I was leaving for the doctor. I stopped and said, "Shoot, I don't have money for the copay, and I'm running late. I don't have time to stop at the bank." My sister gave me the money for it. On the way to the appointment, I realized that, shoot, I was meeting a friend for lunch, and I still don't have any money. I thought to look in the console of my car, but I knew there would be no money there. I never have money in my car. I looked anyway, but when I opened the lid, there sat a $5 bill. Odd, but I was so glad to see it. I didn't think too much about it until later, when I thought hard about it. I didn't leave that money there. That same day, my sisters and nephews went to my uncle's pharmacy and Hallmark shop, where my mom had worked also. My mom had always bought Beanie Babies for my nephews from there. My nephew was looking for a specific beanie, and I'd been unable to find it for months. That day, they found it at the shop. My uncle didn't remember ever seeing that one before, and he took care of the ordering. A few days later, I was sleeping. I was exhausted from the funeral and was taking time off from work. Nobody was home. The window was open, and I was dozing peacefully when I heard quite clearly, "Carrie, Carrie." I sat up, and my heart was pounding. I heard my mother. She was calling me, as if I wasn't supposed to be sleeping, like she always used to do if she thought I were oversleeping. One of the things that my mom always did when she was alive that annoyed me was to yell my name from the bottom of the steps. I heard it so vividly that morning. I want to say it was in my head, but it woke me up, and her voice was as clear as day. My bedroom was the entire length of the top floor of a Cape Cod house. I had my own smoke detector up there. From that day on, whenever I would get really upset about losing my mother, that silly smoke detector would beep. Beep, 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 beep. I changed the battery. Beep. But happened only when I was upset, or thinking of her. The crystals on the phone began to fall off regularly, where they never did before. The phone in the kitchen, which had a speakerphone function, would click on its own violation when someone was on the telephone. It happened about 5 times. That too had never done that before. Suddenly, everything just stopped. No more odd happenings. Then my father went into a coma. Several friends from out of town were staying at the house and keeping a vigil with us at the hospital. One evening, everyone was at the hospital but a friend of the family named Jenny. She had heard the stories of my mom's hauntings and the smoke detector going off. She was reading a book, alone in the house, and the smoke detector in the downstairs hallway started going crazy. Jenny got up, walked into the hallway, looked up at it and said, "Miss Harley, we aren't ready to let Don go yet. You can't have him. Is that okay?" The minute she said that, the smoke detector beeped one more time, and it never did again. It completely freaked her out. Shortly after my father died, all strange happenings ceased little by little. They do not happen anymore. I wish they would. It was almost nice thinking that my mom and our dad were hanging around and watching us. Thanks for reading. One time when I was about 14 years old, I was babysitting for a police officer and his wife. The police officer was on duty that night, and I can't really remember where the wife was going, but nonetheless, they hired me to babysit. I had never been to their house before, and I remember when I got there, how creepy this house had seemed. It was an old house down in Walled Lake, Michigan, and I can remember the house did not have modern heat ducts. Instead, there were registers in the floor in the upstairs that you could peer through clear to the downstairs living area. I don't remember too much about the incident, other than hearing some footsteps upstairs and other noises after I put the couple's children to bed. I could hear the noises very well through the heat registers, and I remember it looked as though somebody had walked right over one of them above me. I remember going upstairs to check to see what they were up to, only to find them sound asleep. I also remember trying to wake them, and it was obvious that they were fast asleep. And besides, they were very small children, like 3 and 4 years old, certainly not old enough to pull off any kind of prank very well. And so I went back downstairs, a little concerned, since the house was dark and creepy to begin with, and I had heard these strange, unexplained noises. But after going back downstairs, and the noises started again, I immediately called dispatch, got the police officer on the phone, and demanded that he come home and take me home immediately, as I would not stay any longer. I never babysat for them again, and I do remember the police officer trying to convince me all the way home that it was just my imagination because the house was old, etc. In either case, I never went back again and told the police officer very nicely to find another babysitter. Another incident happened when I was in high school, shortly before graduation. I used to babysit my little sister after school for a couple hours before my stepmother got home. One afternoon, I was babysitting her and watching TV. She was very young at the time, about 4 years old. This was the time of day that she usually took a nap, and she fell asleep on the couch next to me, like usual. While watching TV that afternoon, and I wasn't watching anything scary, I think I may have been watching either Oprah or a soap opera, I distinctly heard the sliding glass door in the finished basement open and close. You know the sound of sliding glass doors. The sound is very distinct. I didn't think anything of it, My father and stepmother usually came and went through that door, since the finished basement is actually on the ground level, and the living quarters of this beautiful log home is actually on the second floor. This was a common and most used entrance into the house. My father worked out of town during the week and was only home on the weekends. Anyway, like I said, I didn't think anything of it. I thought my stepmother was home and expected her to come walking up the stairs at any moment, like she usually did when she came home. I also remember thinking, boy, she's home early today. I just kept watching television. After about 10 minutes, I noticed that she had not come up the stairs, so I went to the stairs and called down to her, but got no response. I thought to myself, that's weird. I know I heard the door. Then I heard what sounded like somebody downstairs, so I called again, and nothing. So I peered out the kitchen window and looked down into the driveway, and her car was not there. I got scared at that point. I thought to myself, oh no, not again, remembering other incidents while babysitting. And I ran to the telephone to try to call her at work. The phone was dead. I absolutely freaked out at this point. I grabbed my little sister, who was still fast asleep, threw her little winter coat on. It was the middle of winter time. Grabbed the biggest butcher knife I could find, and ran out the front door. I ran down the deck steps and into my dad's old pickup truck in the driveway. I locked the doors and just sat there in total terror. I didn't know what to do. There was no doubt in my mind that somebody was in the house, and I stared at the house for what seemed like forever until my stepmother got home. Of course, she couldn't understand why I was so hysterical, and what on earth I was doing outside in the pickup truck in the middle of the dead winter with a butcher knife of all things. Anyway, she checked the sliding glass door to the basement. It was locked. There seemed to be nobody in the house, and if it were a real person in the house, there was no way they could have escaped unseen by me as I sat in the old pickup truck. I remember how scared I was. The house is in the woods, and back then, there wasn't another house closer than about 80 acres away. By the way, the first thing my stepmother did when she got home and investigated my claim was to check the telephone, which was working fine. Oh well. I know she thought I absolutely lost my rocker that afternoon, but I know better. She still laughs and teases me about it whenever it is brought up now. My little sister, who is now 20 years old, doesn't remember a thing. At the same home, during the same time in my life, shortly before high school graduation, I experienced the strangest things each night in my bedroom. After everybody went to sleep, these strange things occurred for at least several weeks. I would fall asleep, but awaken around 1 to 2 a.m. in the morning because my bed would be shaking. Now, I just want to clarify that this log home is not old or anything. It was only about 10 years old at the time, and was very, very beautiful. I had a beautiful bedroom with pretty pink carpeting. There was nothing really creepy or scary about this house, nor the woods that it was situated in. However, every night like clockwork, for several weeks, I would awaken to feel my bed shaking uncontrollably, and I would throw the covers over my head and just shake in total fear. Then it would stop. I would fall back asleep, and by morning, I would think it was just a dream. Except, after a while, I started realizing that it was no dream. It was really happening. And I can remember one night yelling, "Stop it, go away." And that was the end of it. It never happened again. And after what happened in the earlier story I just told, I never spoke to my parents about it. The only person in the world that I told was my boyfriend, who also happens to be my husband of 14 years. He is convinced that I am sensitive to spiritual things. As I said in my last letter, because of the experiences I've had in my life, like those said about above, and the actual ghost I saw, that I spoke about in my earlier email, I'm so very much interested in ghost hunting. My husband would have no part of it, so when it comes to this stuff, I'm on my own. But I just don't know where to start. I guess there is a part of me that wants to do this, so that I don't feel like I'm crazy. Also because of the so many unanswered biblical questions that I have, that I somehow feel like if I do this, I might feel more resolved in my beliefs. On the other hand, it could prove to be even more confusing. Who knows? If you have any suggestions about how to go about doing this secretly, I can't let anyone in the community I live know what I'm up to. I'm a business owner and a local politician, and I don't need people thinking I'm nuts. I would appreciate any advice you would give me. Thanks so much. "11 years ago, I moved into an old little walkout rambler that sits on my father-in-law's business property in the country. We call it Ghetto in the Meadow. Don't get me wrong, it's okay, but tiny, and at that time, needed some repairs that have since been done. It had at one time been moved to the country by the man that had lived there for many years in the house, until he died in the hospital. His name was Myron. I had to move my king-size waterbed in the unfinished basement, because that's the only place that was big enough for the bed. My boyfriend refused to sleep downstairs, because when we were downstairs, we could hear footsteps above us, going back and forth. One night, we fell asleep on the floor, watching TV on the main floor. Sometime in the night, my boyfriend moved to the couch and left me on the floor. It was about 5 a.m. that I woke up stiff. We were talking and heard a noise like someone walking upstairs. Then we heard a blurp noise in the bathroom. I jokingly told my boyfriend that it was Myron and he had to go to the bathroom. Just after I said it, the water in the bathroom sink came on. He wanted me to stay in the living room and he would check it out. No way. I was right behind him and watched as he had turned the handle to shut the water off. After that, we had many things happen. Lights in the TV would turn on and off. A broom in the basement would get knocked over, and I smelled pipe smoke in the living room once, and perfume in the kitchen several times. Our beagle would stare up at the ceiling, as if watching something by where you get up to the attic. Many times, my boyfriend would get his gun and go looking around the house, because we would hear strange things. He got a double waterbed that would fit in one of the two small bedrooms. After that, we would hear a lot of noise in the basement by a workbench. We lived in the house for 5 years. My mom couldn't believe that we would stay there, but it was pretty much harmless stuff, and it wasn't like it was happening every night. Just when we started to feel like maybe we imagined what happened, something else would go on. Before we moved, I tried to get my husband to come to bed instead of sleeping on the couch. I got his usual reply within a minute, which meant he wouldn't be moving. I went into the bedroom and it felt really cold, so much so that I went and checked the thermostat in case it got turned down. I had just gotten comfortable and heard my husband yell out my name. He said he heard little feet scurrying from the kitchen to the living room really fast and go behind the couch. The couch was only inches away from the wall, and something slapped him on the back of the head. He didn't go back to sleep that whole night. Maybe something was telling him that he should be in bed with me. I found it funny, but he didn't find the humor in it. We had a baby and moved into our new house. I heard balls inside one of her blow-up toys move and went to check on it so I wouldn't wake her up. I thought the toy was by the register and the air conditioning was on, but it wasn't even close by. Twice it happened. One afternoon, I laid down for a nap and remember seeing a very good-looking man come to my bedroom door and talk to me. At first, I was afraid, but when I saw his face, I definitely wasn't. I couldn't remember what he talked to me about, but asked if he could see our baby before he left. He turned around and looked in the other bedroom for a minute, and turned back around and said my name, and told me how beautiful she was, and that she'd be waking up. In that instant, she was crying. He was gone, and I was awake. Do you think it was a dream? Or who was it? Myron, from Ghetto in the Meadow, or my husband's brother that died? After that, nothing unusual happened at our house. My brother-in-law moved to Ghetto in the Meadow and said at first the lights would go on and heard noises, but nothing happened there in years. This is my experience with a haunted house. Me and my family moved into this big house about 15 years ago. I had 2 small daughters and my husband at the time. The first night there, I was alone and had just put my kids to sleep upstairs and was just laying down myself when I heard someone in the kitchen. It sounded like they were going through the drawers frantically, looking for something. Well, I was terrified, as I knew that my husband wasn't there. I went downstairs to see what or who was there, and nothing was out of place. That's when other things started to occur. My youngest daughter wouldn't go upstairs by herself. She always told me that there was a man up there. I didn't understand it till later. As we settled in, things got worse for me. I would be watching TV. The volume would go up and down. Ashtrays on the table would move. The drapes would sway when the windows weren't open. I was bathing one time in the downstairs bathroom and felt something touch my shoulder. It felt very cold. I had things of mine stolen, and I'd never gotten it back. One night, I was just dozing off, and I felt the covers being pulled off of me. This really scared me, but I tried not to think about it the next day. I was cleaning the stairs, and a very deep voice said, "Hey you," right beside me. The hair stood up on my neck. That night, at 2 a.m., someone came running up the stairs, stopping at the top. Of course, I saw nothing there. My husband told me that he awoke one night, and there was a very tall man standing in the corner of our room, dressed in black, just watching us. The next day, my oldest daughter told me that a woman who was dressed like a nurse carrying a tray came out of her closet, walking towards her. She had a name tag, but it wasn't legible. It scared her pretty bad. One morning, I was down in the basement doing laundry, and I hated to go down there. When I got this terrible feeling, I tried to ignore it, but it got worse. The hairs on my neck were tingling. I knew that something was coming up behind me, but I couldn't move. Then it was like someone stomped on the cement floor. It was so weird, because the floor vibrated. I was so scared that I threw my laundry and ran up the stairs. I would also go to bed with jewelry on and wake up, and it would be off, and I would find it somewhere in the house. One morning, I woke up to find a straight razor in my bed down by my feet. I think that did it for me, and I wanted to move out. And the kids' bedroom window would never stay shut. We tried everything to keep it shut, but I would go upstairs, and it would be opened. My mother babysat for me one evening, and when I got home, she was white as a ghost and told me that she would never watch my kids here again. We also had a dog that we kept tied in the corner of the yard, right by the area of the basement that scared me the most, and I saw him digging and didn't think anything of it until I returned and saw that he dug a hole waist deep and was still trying to dig. His paws were bleeding and he was foaming at the mouth. I had to pull him out of there. It was horrible. He finally moved out, and for a long time, my daughter was afraid that the man was going to follow us. I looked up the history of the house and found out that it was built in the 1800s. That was all that I could find out. The house is still there. I drive by it sometimes and wonder if the people who live there now have any problems. There's a lot of ghosts in my family, so I'll just tell you a few. My grandfather passed away before I was born. He used to wait for my aunt, sitting in his rocking chair, every day to get out of school. Well, one day after he died, my aunt said that she came home from school to find her babysitter with her jaw hanging open and wide-eyed, staring at the rocker. It was rocking by itself, and their dog was sitting in front of it, begging. Suddenly, The rocker stopped moving, and the dog started walking slowly back to the door, which was deadbolt locked. The door unlocked in front of everyone and swung open. So did the screen door. Normally, if the back door was open, the dog would run out. He didn't. Then both doors shut again, but they didn't lock. Another story is told by my mother and my aunts on my father's side. They were all playing Trivial Pursuit when a question came up about one of the wars that my grandfather had fought in. Meanwhile, there was a pot of spaghetti sitting on the stove. My Aunt Patty said a smart comment about my grandfather and the war, just joking around. Well, the pot of spaghetti flew across the room and landed right next to my Aunt Patty's feet. It dumped everywhere and just missed her. I think he was just trying to tell her that her joke wasn't funny. My personal experiences are different. One, for instance, was when my grandfather died in 1990. 2 weeks later, me and my cousin slept in my grandmother's house. My aunts and fathers lived there. Well, about 8 p.m., we both went into the living room to watch TV, and my grandma's rocker was rocking by itself. That I saw with my own 2 eyes. Another incident was at my cousin Sandy's house. My cousin Brandy and I were babysitting. She was on the phone with her boyfriend when the kitchen light switch started turning on and off by itself. It was going up and down like someone was turning it on and off. Okay, last story. The story to my cousin Sandy's house is even weirder. A man had hung himself in the attic a couple of years before she moved in. My cousin was a dancer, so she used to exercise a lot to stay in shape. Anyways, she told me a few stories about when she was exercising, and she would get tapped on the shoulder. Or once she heard someone calling out her newborn son's name, and no one was in the house. She heard knocks on the front door. The attic door would open and shut continuously. Her brother-in-law was there on a few instances. Whoever he wasn't good. He was definitely there to scare, so she moved out within 6 months. I have a few more that I can think of, but I think this is already too long. I don't know if there's a reason for so many hauntings in my family or not, but I wish that it would stop. You never know what would happen if someone really ever got one of these spirits angry. Thanks for reading my family history. I hope you enjoyed it. I didn't. My story has to do with things that happened to me as a child. When I was 6 years old, my parents bought a very old house, probably around 100 years old, and that was back in 1976. It was a very large home, and some of the original wallpaper was still in it. I've always been in kind of tune with the supernatural, and I also have a psychic sense. I'm not saying I am psychic, but I just know things, and I can't explain it. Well, anyway, I know that my sister was very afraid of this house. She is 3 years younger than me. She would either sleep with my parents or with me, and she would never cross the long hall that ran through the center of the house by herself. I know that one day, I was sitting in the living room, and I got this really weird feeling. It really felt like I wasn't the only one in the room. I felt like someone was staring at me. Now keep in mind that my mother and sister had gone to the store, so I was in the house alone. At this time, I was about 9 years old. I was sitting on the floor, and I just happened to look up. If you are familiar with old houses, you know that some of these have glass windows at the top of each door that I guess people used for ventilation before air conditioning was invented. Well, the upstairs of this house had been added years after the original one story had been built, and the steps that led upstairs went even with the glass window above the door in the room I was in. There was also a small triangle of wood that was missing from the step, and that is where my eyes shifted to. There was something looking at me through that space. I was so scared that I grabbed my dog and ran to the front porch, just hoping my mother would drive up. I don't know what it was, but there was something up there. People in the neighborhood were always asking if the house was haunted, and one time, an old woman I had never seen before asked me if I knew of the girl that had been locked in her room, in my house, and she had died there. There's also another story that happened in the same house. My uncle was living with us. He was 70 years old, and I was about 10 at the time. One night, I heard him calling my father. He was shouting, and that is what woke me up. My father went running into his room, and this was my uncle's reply. "I know you're not going to believe this, and I know I shouldn't be seeing this, but I do. There's a black woman standing in front of the fireplace, holding a little girl's hand, and she's wearing a red coat and hat." Then, my father said that my uncle's eyes followed something around the room, and then my uncle began to scream again, "No, go away, don't come near me." Then they disappeared. My father said he had never been so scared in his life because my uncle was being so rational about it, like he knew he shouldn't be seeing something like that, but he did. I knew there was something in that house. Although we moved out when I was 14, I still drive by to look, and I still do get a creepy feeling about it, just from driving by. My mom and one of my sisters just moved to New York, and we are living in the house my mom grew up in. Both of her parents are dead, and have been for a number of years. Ever since we have gotten here, my mom and sister have felt something in the house. I can't feel anything, but I can see something. The other day, I watched my dead grandpa of 11 years walk into the room. I ran upstairs so fast once, I was able to move and stayed there until my sister decided to come downstairs for bed. The next day we started talking about what happened. My sister said that once she got into bed, and underneath the covers, she felt something on top of her, giving her a hug, and it hugged her until she fell asleep. My mom then joined in on the conversation and said that her parents still live in this house. She told us that she actually sat down the other day and talked with her father, and then her mother joined in and told her to talk to someone in our church. She did that, and found out that the person she was supposed to talk to was in charge of genealogy, and that they actually knew the same people from San Diego. This kind of spooked me out, because it took my mom a good few months to tell me this. She always tells me something I should know after I see a spirit. Thanks for reading. Many people see spirits in houses and such, so they conclude that the places are haunted. However, I believe that I am haunted. I've seen spirits my whole life, but some, when I was a child, I can't even remember, so my mother tells me. The one I'm going to talk to you about happened when I was about 1 year old. I'm now 18. We lived in a town just outside of San Diego, California. The people that lived in the house before us abused their children and locked them in the closets. My mom has found evidence of this, but does not know to what extent these children were tortured. My mom has had many experiences with the evil spirits that lived in the house. One day, when I was finished playing with my blocks, she went in to clean up after me. She knew exactly how many blocks were there and found that one was missing. She looked all over the room and even felt around on the bed and still couldn't find it. She then left the room to see if I had it with me, which I didn't, so she went back into the room, and there it was, just sitting on the edge of the bed where she had previously looked and felt. My mom always kept the house spick and span. She hated a messy house. She had just finished cleaning the living room when she left, and came back in and found a hairbrush in the middle of the floor. No one had been in the bathroom or the living room since she cleaned them. The spirits knew how to make my mom mad. They would always take things and put them way out of place, so my mom was always running around, putting them back into place, just to find them out of place again. She was always cold in the house, even if she was just sitting by a roaring fire. She would always see little black figures running across the room, and when she would look to see again, they were gone. So finally, my mom took my sisters and me out of the house and swore we would never go back in until my dad said a prayer to get rid of the spirits. So my dad was inside for a little bit, and then he came out and said that he said a prayer. My mom questioned him for a while, and then he had her convinced, so my mom took all of us back in the house. She then turned to my dad, and in a very stern voice said, "You didn't pray." My dad of course asked her how she knew. She said, "I'm sitting in front of a fire and I'm cold." His face just fell. So my mom had us all sit down and have a family prayer together. After that prayer to get rid of the spirits, they've never come back. We then moved out of the house, and I've been able to see spirits all the time. Every house, I've either seen a spirit or have felt someone watching me. This is still going on. Just 3 days ago, I watched my grandfather walk into the room. He has been dead since I was 7 years old. If anyone knows what is going on with me, please email me. When I was 7 years old, my parents, my sister, and I lived in a home that was a one-story house that sat way back from the street. My aunt used to babysit us when my parents were away at work. Anytime I got into trouble, my aunt would make me go into a little bedroom in the back of our house, and she would make me stay in there for hours at a time. I never knew why, but I was deathly afraid of that room, and the whole time I was in there, I would hide under the blankets, too afraid to move, until she came to let me out. One day, while I was playing in the yard, I found out why I was so afraid of that room. While I was playing outside with my toys, I suddenly got the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around me, but I didn't see anybody. I went back to playing, but I just couldn't shake that watched feeling. I turned to look at the house to see if maybe my aunt or sister was around, and I saw a woman in the bathroom window, and she was watching me. I know it wasn't my aunt or sister, because they both have very dark hair, and the woman in that window had very light-colored hair. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to move. I stayed outside for the rest of the afternoon, because I didn't want to go into the house. When my mom came home that day, I finally went inside. I didn't say anything to my mom or anyone about what I had seen. I was worried that they wouldn't believe me. So, I kept quiet. My sister and I shared a bedroom, and that night, I woke up to the sounds of cupboards opening and closing, like someone was looking for something, and I heard glasses being moved around, and the water being turned off and on. Well, being a little kid, I figured I was just imagining it, and as I lay there listening to this, I looked over at my sister, who was sleeping through this whole thing. The next morning I asked my mom if she was up last night, getting a drink, and she said no, but she looked at me kind of funny. That night, my mom had some friends over, and she sent my sister and I to bed early. My sister fell right to sleep, but I just kept thinking about what I saw in the window and what I heard the night before. My mom and her friends started talking about a lady who had hung herself in the back bedroom of our house. I could not believe what I was hearing. My mom then went on to tell her friends that she hears noises in the kitchen at night. The next day, as I was playing in the yard, I saw the woman in the bathroom window again. I started to cry, and my aunt got mad at me, so she tried to lock me in the back room again. I was kicking and screaming that I didn't want to go in there, but she wouldn't listen to me. As I sat on the bed, under the covers, I heard the door swing open. I thought it was my aunt to let me come out, so I uncovered my head, but nobody was there. I then started to hear a squeaking noise, kind of like something heavy hanging from a wooden bar. It sounded like it was coming from the closet. The closet wasn't really big, walk-in one. There was no way I was going to look in there. I just sat on the bed, listening to this noise, until my aunt came to get me. I later found out that the lady hung herself in the closet of that back room. I'm just wondering if anyone knows why she did this, and when it took place. Well, that's my story, and believe me, it is all completely true. Although this is a truer tale, it's not one of your spine tinglers, just something odd that cannot be explained. It was told to me several years ago by a colleague, and happened to her mom, Jean, and some friends. Although Jean lived in Romford, Essex, she regularly went to a Keep Fit class, a small school hall in Upminster. The class had finished, and her friends had piled into a car and drove around the corner, parking near the chip shop, and they all ordered fish and chips, like you do when you've just had a good workout. They were all sitting in the car quietly eating, well, one person noticed something odd and nudged the person next to them. Eventually, they were all mesmerized, mouths agape, chips forgotten, as their attention was focused on the activities in the churchyard over the road. Quite clearly, they could see a solemn nighttime funeral procession of a coffin being carried on the shoulders by 6 pallbearers, all decked out in long, black-tailed coats. They silently watched the procession walk from one side of the church and disappear around to the other side, St. Mary's Lane, for anyone who lives nearby. Of course, they all asked each other, "Did you see what I saw?" knowing full well they did. The next day, Jean decided to visit the church as she just had to know what had happened. Maybe someone was buried late last night. However, she got to the church and found the vicar. She worded the question carefully so as not to look like a complete idiot, and was completely stunned when the vicar told her that no funeral took place last night. She said that from the look on his face, it was fairly obvious that he knew why she was asking, but being a vicar, he simply smiled and walked away. Spooky. I've been past the churchyard, as my grandparents used to live just down the road, and it is quite creepy looking place. All the stones are really old and crumbly, and covered in moss. None of the names or dates are readable. It's one of those graveyards where you can look at for a little while, and then you kind of shudder and have to look away. I used to think it was my childish imagination, but even these days, the place still gives me the creeps, even in the middle of summer. Well, like everyone else, I'll start off with some background information. I'm 19 right now, and ever since I was young, have had a fascination with death and what lies beyond. Every time I would read something, I would try to think I had a similar experience, but I didn't. I've lived in Chicago for most of my life in the same house. Nothing really special about it, except our basement floors are basically entirely dirt. But that doesn't really mean anything to my story. When my mom found out she was expecting my 3rd brother, she decided we needed to do a little remodeling and room changing, so I ended up having my brother's old room, which also used to be my brother's room. Nothing unusual happened while I was living there until the end of my senior year in high school. I was asleep one night, and the room got unbelievably cold, although no windows were open, and it was a warm night. I buried myself under my blankets and tried to go back to sleep. This would happen from time to time. Then one night, I was woken up again by the extreme cold when I saw a shadow of a man whose figure I could not make out, just watching me sleep. He stood about a foot away from my bed. When he noticed I was awake, he just turned and walked out of my room, but he went through the wall right next to my door. The first few times I saw him, I was petrified and would just close my eyes tight till I felt the room was warming up. And there were also times when I would see him coming from the kitchen, which was outside my room, and walk back into my closet. Also at night, I would hear things fall off my dresser, and I would just calmly as I could ask him to pick them up. And when I'd wake, everything would be as I left it. I never told any of my friends or family about this, because they are not believers. Till one day, my mom had called me at school since I had moved out for college, telling me my sister refuses to go or sleep into my room anymore. That she woke up one night and came screaming into my parents' bedroom about a man who was watching her while she was sleeping in my room. I didn't say anything while my mom told me, but I did interrupt her before she could give me the description of the man my sister gave. I told her what I had seen, and my mom dropped the phone. She kept asking how I knew, so I finally told her I had seen him before. I also told her if the lights ever go out in my room, to calmly ask the man to turn them back off. My mom just laughed at me. Also, I should mention, since I moved out of the house for school, my room remains hot to room temperature while I'm gone. But when I come home on weekends, the temp does not go above 50 degrees, no matter how high we set the heat or how many little heaters we put in there. Then one night, my mom was clearing out some of my sister's clothes, so I would have room for mine when I came home for the summer, and my dad was sitting outside in the kitchen watching TV. It was relatively late at night, and my mom had just finished clearing out a drawer and was about to get up when the lights went out. My mom said out loud, "Look, I'm almost done here, and Jennifer will be home next week, so please just put the lights on." And just as she finished, the lights went on, and my mom ran out of my room. Since I've been home for the summer, my room is back and stays at a normal temperature, which I'm thankful for. But I still hear things in my closet, and I'll see a light shine through the closet doors, although I don't have any lights in the closet. "20 years ago, when we moved into our house, a duplex, we were good friends with the tenant, and she had told us that she was going to be gone for the weekend. So we were home, sleeping on a sofa sleeper in the living room at the time, and we heard noises from the upstairs, sounding if someone was dragging furniture across the floor. My husband went to the stairs and yelled up to see if there was someone there, and the apartment was dark. So he came downstairs, and we fell asleep, not thinking any more about it. Well, the next day when she came home, she came downstairs and asked us if there had been a problem upstairs, and we said no. Why? And she said that she was just wondering why we moved all of her dining room chairs into the kitchen. At first I was scared, but then for years nothing had happened, until Jenny was born. One night, my husband had gone hunting, and I was awoken by a noise of her mobile being turned on. I went into her room, and she was just lying there awake, watching the mobile move above her. Then the last time that anything happened was about 3 years ago. My husband and I had divorced, and I was seeing someone. Well, my friend, as I call it, must have not liked him, because he always kept his cologne on the dresser, and at least once or twice a week, I would come home and find it either knocked over, on the floor, or in the garbage. At first we blamed the cat, but then we started closing the bedroom door, and it would still happen. Of course, he never believed. Nobody ever does, but I do. Nevertheless, I'm not with him anymore, and have since been remarried, and have no problems. Sometimes when I'm alone, I do feel that there is someone or something there with me, and my daughter. I'm sure that you receive thousands of these stories, but mine is true, whether you or anyone else believe mine. I know in my heart that it is true. Back in about 1982, I became resident manager of an old rooming house in Placerville, California, better known as Hangtown. Placerville is just a few miles from Coloma, where the gold rush took place at Sutter's Fort on the American River. The rooming house, during the gold rush era, was the only hospital in the area. It consisted of 42 rentable rooms and several miscellaneous rooms that were used by residents for laundry, storage, vending machines, a TV room, community kitchen, dining room, and my office. I'd been manager for about 6 months before the chaos started. I've always been a sensitive, having had several experiences all through childhood and adulthood. One cold winter night, a bad storm had moved in, and the main highway to South Lake Tahoe had to close, trapping several skiers and gamblers halfway up the hills. It didn't take long before the motels and hotels filled up. I got a call from the police department asking me if I could accommodate the stranded travelers. I let them know that I had about 10 or 12 vacancies, but to let them know that our power had failed due to the storm. All streetlights were out, and there was total blackness everywhere. There were several steps leading up to the entry door, and I was afraid that in the darkness, someone might get hurt. All of the tenants helped out. We gathered up the candles and put them out on the steps. We dug up some old coffee percolators and made the coffee the old way and set out to greet our guests. They didn't come in one at a time. They came in at about 10 at a time. I paid some volunteer residents to get rooms ready while I checked the people in. There was a group of the younger residents there at the stairs with flashlights ready to take the new guests up to the long flight of stairs to the upper rooms. As the guests would arrive, these men would chant, "Welcome to the Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave." All went well, and the next morning, everyone thanked and said they had a wonderful stay and really enjoyed the off-the-wall hospitality. Shortly thereafter, we had a tenants meeting. During the meeting, these men were chanting the words to the song Hotel California and called my attention to several verses. During the storm, I had lit the candles to show the guests the way. At one time, the community kitchen had been the manager's resident kitchen. In the day of the hospital, it had been emergency room. In the master's chambers, they gathered for the feast. Other verses fit also. Every time the song would come on a radio anywhere in the rooming house, the volume would be cranked. Then one night, as I sat up figuring the next day's bank deposit, I heard screaming. It was the young girl down the hall on the first floor who was living there with her small son. She told me that there was a face of a man on her wall. My husband went and checked it out, and yes, it was there. Later that night, about 2 a.m., she came to my office again and said that she kept hearing a whistle, like a bamboo whistle, and a child's voice calling mommy outside her room. I went down there and heard the same thing. One of the young men who was still up watching TV went outside to check it out. He said the sound was coming from every direction he walked. He would hear it from the south, north, east, and west as he walked. By now, the commotion had woke up just about everyone in the rooming house. The TV room filled up with people telling me of the experience that they had been having, but were too afraid to talk about it until this night. About 4 a.m., everyone went back to bed. I stayed up, along with two of the younger, more brave men. As we sat in the TV room talking, we heard loud stomping coming from somewhere in the back part of the lower story. At the end of the main entry hall, there was a swinging door that led to the laundry area. Beyond that, the garbage room. Beyond the garbage room, there were other empty rooms that I was told later was the hospital morgue. As we passed the community kitchen and started to approach the swinging door, the footsteps got louder. We all looked through the window at the top of the swinging door and saw no one. Just then, the door swung open and stayed open as though someone were holding it. Needless to say, me and these brave men backed up quickly. No one was standing there at the door, but it remained open for several seconds and then swung shut. It was a quiet, still night, so the theory of a breeze or wind is out. In a few minutes, the footsteps started again, just as loud as the first time. We looked down the hall, and the swinging door was opening and shutting continuously and with a lot of force. We were all speechless. All this time this was happening, we were still hearing the whistle and the child's voice calling mommy. In the nights to follow, there were several incidents, and some residents that have been there for years moved out. Within a matter of a few months, I was gone. I've never gone back there, but I wonder to this day if there are still occurrences at that place. Every time I hear that song, it brings that place to mind, and when it does, I get a cold chill, and every detail is just as visible in my mind as it was that very night. My best friend Kay just moved out of a house that is most definitely haunted. The house is in Dayton, Idaho, a small town of about 200 people, about 10 miles north of the Utah-Idaho border. It sits on Dayton's main street across from the city park. It's a large old house that has been divided into a two-family dwelling. My friend lived in the front part of the house, while another family lived in the back. Kay told me that she and her 3 kids never liked the house from the beginning, but she had taken a new job in Preston and needed to find a house to live in. After spending days looking for a place to live, she was told about this house and went out to look at it. She said when she saw the house, it looked dark, even though the sun was shining. When she went inside, she said the house was even darker inside, and there was a heavy feeling in the house she just couldn't shake. She really didn't like the house, but it was all that she could find, so she took it. From the beginning, she and the kids disliked living there. Her 14-year-old daughter hated staying by herself in the house and would do anything to avoid being alone. She said that she always felt like someone was watching her. One afternoon, when she was alone, she saw the dark figure of a man looking through the hall window at her. This really scared her. The hall window was high enough off the ground, and you would need a ladder to see in the window. When you pass the hall window, the hall turns and goes past the stairs and ends in the master bedroom. This part of the hall at the house of the stairs is always frigid. My friend had found a new home to rent and was eager to get out of the house. I was helping her pack, and I had mentioned to her how cold that hallway was by the stairs. It was like walking into a freezer. She said that it was always like that. Even in the summer, when it was 90 degrees outside, she said that the hall was freezing cold. I thought at first it was cold because the storm windows had been left open, so I closed them. Then it dawned on me that it wasn't that cold outside because we've been having such a mild winter. It also felt like a cold wind was blowing across the hall, even though there was no drafts anywhere. The cold spot never moved. As soon as you went into the bedroom, or upstairs into the bathroom or kitchen, it was warm. But as soon as you stepped into the hall, you froze. Her 8-year-old twin boys would never go to bed alone. Kay told me that they were scared to sleep without each other being there. Mac told me that he and his brother Jared never went to bed alone, that it was too scary to be up there. Until they moved into this house, they had never been afraid to sleep alone. Kay and her kids finally moved into their new house. The other family that lived in the back moved out 2 days before Kay did. Renters never stay long in that house. Their new house is bright and cheerful, a stark contrast to the old house. I've experienced a lot of these kind of things all my life, but this was the first time I had never experienced psychic cold or cold spots. I get cold just thinking about it. I read your personal story. It was spooky, but I enjoyed it. Thanks for having the courage to share it. I've also had some paranormal experiences, but considerably mild in comparison to yours. Please allow me to share them with you. The first possible experience occurred when I was very young, under the age of 8 years old. I had an imaginary playmate, but my mother thought I was in touch with the entity. The playmate was adult, male, and went by the name Shadow. I don't remember Shadow, but I do remember the last time I talked about Shadow, because my mom asked me why I didn't mention Shadow anymore. Apparently I would talk about him at great length. I said that Shadow had gone away. My mom asked me when he would come back, but I said I didn't know. When my mom asked where Shadow had gone, again, I said I didn't know. My mom told me she used to hear me talking to Shadow, and that it sounded one half of a telephone conversation. It wasn't like I was making up the other half of the conversation, but merely responding to something that was being said to me. Perhaps I was in contact with an entity. However, Shadow never frightened me. He was a comforting presence. Perhaps it was an entity, although I've wondered if I was in contact with my guardian angel. Then again, I've always had a strong imagination. Perhaps it was just an imaginary playmate. The next paranormal experience happened in my brother's home in Moss Beach, California, approximately 1/4 of a mile from the Moss Beach Distillery, a restaurant that has a reputation for being haunted. When this experience happened, I did not know about the hauntings of the restaurant or of the history of the area. My brother's house has a downstairs bedroom that has long been considered my bedroom. because I always slept there, and always with the door locked, since everyone else slept upstairs. One night, I was awakened out of deep sleep by a man's voice, a voice much deeper than that of my brother's. The voice sounded angry, full of accusation, and said, "You don't belong here." I had a brief glimpse of a man in my room. His back was to the window, so he was in silhouette, but very solid looking. What I could see was a very craggy and rough-hewn looking face, and he was wearing a heavy canvas jacket, like the type firemen or fishermen wear. He was pointing down at me in the bed. However, it was just that brief glimpse, and then it was gone. I've wondered if I dreamt it, because I was able to go right back to sleep. However, I doubt I would have dreamt that I didn't belong there, because I had spent so much time in my brother's house that I felt I had as much right to be there as my own brother did. When I told my brother of the incident, he said he had something spooky happen also. One night, about 2 a.m., he was still up reading when he heard someone coming up the stairs. My brother built his house from scratch and was very familiar with the entire house. It wasn't one creak that he heard. He heard every stair being trod upon. Thinking he had a prowler, he got out a gun and went to find out who was in his house. He found nothing, and all the windows and doors were locked tight. He said it was very eerie. Later we found out that Moss Beach coastline, not too far from Half Moon Bay, was the site of a lot of illegal bootlegging activity during Prohibition. There were accidents, gunfights, and other tragedies that follow illegal activity. Since finding out about the history of the area, we have since wondered what it was that my brother and I encountered. The last paranormal experience that happened occurred within a 3-month period after my mother's death. Perhaps I should say experiences, because on 3 separate occasions, I heard knocking. I was living with my maternal grandmother in the house my mother grew up. Each time I heard the knocking, it was just 3 evenly spaced knocks, but they were loud. Third time it happened, I went to answer the front door, convinced that someone was there. My bedroom was in the back of the house, which was some distance from the front door, so the knocks had to be loud for me to have heard them. I'm not positive, but I think it was Mom coming back to say hi. There's another possible experience. Both my husband and I felt something pressing down on the bed while we slept. The first time it happened to me, it woke me up. I thought the cat had just jumped on the bed near my feet. When I realized the cat was next to my pillow, it got my attention, but again, I was not afraid. The cat often moves his head and eyes like he is watching something I can't see, and only in the bedroom. And when I'm in the apartment alone, taking a shower, I hear a man's footsteps coming into the bathroom. They always sound the same, and I'm guessing they are a man's footsteps because the stride is wider than a woman's and heavier. Like I said, my experiences are very mild in comparison to what you have experienced. I've never felt fear during the experiences, but later, contemplating the possibilities, I tended to spook myself. Pretty tame stuff, but every now and then, it grabs my attention. I haven't tried to talk to any entity, if indeed there is an entity, because I would rather the experiences remain merely an amusing conversation piece, and not the source of a major investigation. Thanks for letting me share my story. You have a terrific site. I hope to visit again. Hi. I just wanted to submit my story of some experiences we had in the house my daughter and I lived in from August 2001 to February of 2002. This house is located in Pendleton, Oregon. In July 2001, we lived in a small duplex that burned down, so my daughter and I lived in it for a short while. Then the hospital I worked for had a house that no one was living in, so we were able to rent it. This house had a complete upstairs, then another apartment downstairs. When we first moved in, we didn't notice anything at all. Then my dad moved in with us and lived in the downstairs apartment. First thing that happened was in the very early AM, like 4 a.m. We could hear a baby crying from somewhere in the house, but the exact location could never be found. Then my dad, who was a true skeptic of the supernatural, actually admitted they had seen a young woman in a large brimmed red hat in the downstairs area. Both my daughter and I could hear people walking up and down the concrete steps that led to the downstairs apartment. Shortly before Christmas that year, I was laying in bed, mostly asleep, but aware of the house, and I heard very distinct footsteps coming up the back steps, walk through the kitchen, dining room, living room, and into my bedroom. I even heard the bags rustle at the end of my bed as they walked by. I stand straight up, thinking it was my dad coming upstairs to tell me something, and when I looked, there was no one there. I laid back down and heard the footsteps walk back out of my room, through the other two rooms, and back down the stairs. One of the most interesting things that happened was that my daughter loved to sing, and she was recording herself sing on a very simple old-fashioned tape recorder. She sang 3 songs. On the first one, everything was fine. Then on the second one, it started out in her voice. Then all of a sudden, it was a man's voice singing the song. Then that song got over. Then it went back into her voice. This was so scary, we couldn't believe it. Then right after the New Year, my dad became very ill and was admitted to the hospital for over a month. While he was gone, the haunting became even more noticeable. We would hear very loud noises coming from downstairs, and the TV would turn on and just blare. So, I completely locked up the downstairs so no one could come or go from any of the entrances. One night my daughter and I were watching TV, and all of a sudden, the TV downstairs came on so loud, it was shaking the upstairs. You could hear people walking around in circles in the kitchen, and you could hear voices of 2 men arguing and talking, coming from the downstairs. We ended up having to move, so I don't know if any haunting continues there or not. The house has since been sold, and new people live there now, and I've always wanted to ask them. Hello, my name is Laura. I've had a lot of experiences in my life. A lot of people say ghosts follow me, and especially my sister-in-law, who has been around me when things seem to happen. I would like to share 2 incidents in particular that scared my family and also myself. The first story starts when we moved into my grandmother's house. Everybody in my family said it was haunted, but I did not believe it. I visited there and spent the night there a lot, and nothing too strange has happened that could not be explained. It was the second night in the house, and I was giving my daughter a bath. She was taking her bath, and I was sitting on the sink, plucking my eyebrows, when all of a sudden, she turned to me and said, "Mommy, there are red eyes in here." I said, "What? Where, honey?" She turned to show me, and look on her face was that of sheer terror. I would never forget the fear in her face. She let out a piercing scream, and I was afraid. She was acting like someone was coming after her. I ran, grabbed her out of the tub, we slipped to the door, and I dove out of the room. My husband was dead asleep on the couch, but he flew up and went into the bathroom, swinging his arms. He thought someone had broken in or something. She was really freaking out. We were in the living room trying to calm her down. She was hysterical. All she kept saying was, "He's gonna get me. Don't let him get me." And we said, "Who?" And she said, "The man with the eyes." We let her know she was okay, and nobody was coming for her. We almost calmed her down, and as soon as we said we wouldn't let anyone get her, and that she was safe, the garbage flung across the room, and it was loud. That was the last incident that night. My cousin was sleeping over one night. She went home crying because I told her about the incident that happened, and she got a little vocal to the ghost, and a screwdriver flew off the fridge and hit her in the stomach. There were happenings like doors opening, water turning off, scratching at the doors, and on, and toys going off by themselves. Second story. We recently moved from Fort Lauderdale to St. Augustine. We actually moved to Lake Butler. We lived out in the middle of nowhere. One day, I was up watching TV. I had nothing to drink, and I do not do anything else. Anyway, I was watching TV and got distracted by something out the window. It looked like a green glowing circle. It was about the size of a golf ball, and the light was gleaming off of this thing. I was wondering to myself what in the world. All of a sudden, came another one, and then another. In like 2 seconds, there seemed to be at least 10, and it looked like they were trying to come through the window. I got scared and turned my head, thinking it would go away. As I turned my head, I looked at the door window, and a flash of heat lightning or some kind of flash lit up the window, and it looked like a man, almost transparent, but not quite. He seemed dark. I don't know. Anyway, it is hard to explain, but it got me so bad, my body hurts. I ran to the window, closed the blinds, and ran to bed, and forced myself to sleep. Things still happen a lot. My family and I just choose to ignore it. I hope you all don't think I'm crazy. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, it's Phantom of Darkness here, and I just want to let you know that this is a video. I'm not sure if you guys were aware of that. I certainly wasn't aware of that. What happened was I was making a video, and then I was like, wait a second, is this a video? So I uploaded it, and I was like, whoa, it is a video. And then, so what came together, what came to fruition was I realized it was a video, and like, that's why I'm stuttering, that's why I'm slurring my words, because I didn't even realize that this was a video, even though I was making a video in the process, so I realized that I made a video. There's a wrap. Just kidding. I'm just being weird and high energy, as usual. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed this video of spectacular proportions. That doesn't even make any sense. We've got, a lot of stories to recap in this compilation here. I'm kind of taking a risk here because apparently duplication occurs. And what duplication is when they completely lie about your channel and they say that, oh, if you have compilations on your channel, we're going to demonetize you. So, and that's a whole entire channel, so you won't be able to get it back. So hopefully that doesn't happen on my channel. But, I'm taking a risk because you guys enjoy the long videos, you guys enjoy the compilation. So every once in a while, I'm going to do it. So I don't know, who cares? I'm rebellious. Yeah. So in the comment section below, just make sure you comment. And don't forget to like if you're new, and subscribe if you're new, and if you want to share this video if you're new. Basically, if you're new, do everything, and basically if you're old, do everything too. Anyway, guys, good night, good morning, I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye, have a good weekend, please.